Hello, welcome to the CURE presentation, Fundamentals of Seed Saving. I'm Leslie Kaiser, Garden Coordinator and a moderator for this session. Our presenter this evening is Stephanie Olivas. Stephanie is a Chicana student, mother, and advocate for New Mexico. In spring 2021, she graduated from the University of New Mexico with a Bachelor of Arts in Chicano Studies and Bachelor of Science in Biology with a concentration in botany. Stephanie is interested in researching the connections between traditional ecological knowledge, soil, microbiology, and a praxis called agroecology in order to achieve food security and sovereignty. Over the past 10 years, through Project Feed the Hood, a food justice program of the Southwest Organizing Project, she has learned from local and global organizers about food systems and sovereignty. Stephanie, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for the introduction. And as mentioned in my bio, I just graduated with 2 bachelor's degrees with a focus mostly in botany, although I do want to learn more about soil sciences. But as you know, when we're talking about food, food involves so many different aspects, from seed to table. And so I've gained the expertise in a little bit of everything. And seeds is definitely something all of us should be passionate about. So there's lots of reasons why we should save our seeds. I think first and foremost, one of the most important ones is sovereignty. And the idea of sovereignty is just to be able to have autonomy over our land and our water and be able to decide how it should be managed or distributed or utilized. There's even topics about body sovereignty, so seed, food, water. I feel like those 3 things are sort of all go hand in hand. And there are very few communities who still have that. So protecting it in any way we can is very, very important. Seeds are also important to save because they have a millennia of history contained within them. Another reason I have listed here is diversity. And we hear this in so many different topics. The more diverse a class is, the more diverse our seeds are, the more diverse our farms are, the healthier they're going to be, and the more ecosystem health and animal health and health for us that's going to foster. Food security. So I have noted there we still need land and water sovereignty first, and so there's places even in New Mexico, but particularly a place I visited in San Antonio where they have 5 Air Force bases surrounding a community, and those Air Force bases have been poisoning the land for so long that the people can't even plant their seeds and grow food there. So we still have a lot to fight for in order to be able for lots of communities to even have access to a plot of land or a box to be able to grow food. But the ultimate goal one day is that, we'll be able to grow our own food again, because it wasn't even that long that communities used to be able to do that. And then it's very economical for the individual to be able to save seeds. Seeds are really, really expensive, especially those cash crops. They run several dollars for a tiny pack of seeds. And so for people to be able to save their own seeds is really important. This is where I want to share a video. So this is the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. I highly recommend folks check out.
What is a seed? Our past, our present, and our future.
Our ancestors, our future generations.
Mohongabi wagizar
of knowledge and cosmic understanding.
We are humbled by the seeds.
Seeds are what sustain me and my family.
The seeds of my ancestors.
Seeds are our children.
The creation's children.
Seeds are our culture, our heritage.
Past, our history, and our health.
It's in our DNA. It's in our spirit that we know this.
We need to unite as a Native community to protect the seeds.
We're developing a network of seed stewards, seed keepers, seed growers.
Resources and wisdom together in a big circle.
Teaching, instructing.
Having seed exchanges. It's not only growing good seeds and creating access for them, but it's growing good seed stewards.
Multi-generational activities, carrying on our heritage.
Be self-reliant and self-sufficient.
Nourish those seeds and get them back on the table and into people's lives.
Because it's all about food, right?
You exploit what you merely value, but you defend what you love. And part of the seed sovereignty movement is remembering to love our seeds because they are our relative.
The seed movement is not just the responsibility of the farmers or gardeners in our communities, but it's everyone's responsibility.
Decide what is being planted, where it's being planted, and by whom it's being harvested and gathered and cooked.
From seed to seed, just as our ancestors cared for them.
Corporations want to come in and buy the rights to our homeland's ability to make and keep life.
Nobody owns these seeds. Those seeds are life. We are who our ancestors dreamed of. We need to be the ancestors to our future generations.
I was going to show you guys some other web pages as well, but definitely check out the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance and their seed report. There's lots of really cool resources out there, and I don't know if anybody's ever been to a seed exchange, but that's a really great way to get heritage seeds. And if you can, I would definitely suggest joining some of these alliances and some of these groups because they're just amazing resources and so many people to learn from. I wanted to talk about GMOs a little bit. So a genetically modified organism. When we refer to GMOs, typically it's the process of where they go in and they splice the DNA and move genes around. And so there's another video that we won't watch after all, since we're a little bit shorter on time. A lot of scientists make the argument, which they make in this video, is, they've been genetically modifying organisms for thousands of years. And that is not true. So they use the example of breeding dogs and yes, breeding certain crops, but they try and say that it's the same thing and it's not. And there are a lot of differences. And the arguments that they say that GMO seeds are going to be the most beneficial is because increased yield, increased resistance. And it turns out that those things that they promised aren't even true. The yield of GMOs is comparable to just using natural processes. And as we're finding as well is the more diversity in our seeds and more diversity in our fields of non-GMO crops are more resilient than these monocrop GMO farms that are at risk of, if everything's the same, they're at risk of being wiped out completely. And we've seen this happen already. And so, yeah, people go back and forth on this. And then it gets into questions of sovereignty as well. These corporations, they have definitely mishandled and sort of like ruined it for everybody. And they're putting, farmers' livelihoods at risk and putting them in situations, if they're going to like try and do a lawsuit against a farmer because the pollen crossed over into the farmer's crops, and, they want to own that gene. And so unfortunately, there's a lot of farmers worldwide who, will even take their own lives because they're just out of options. And so, yeah, we can have this discussion more later on. Like, is there going to be a place for GMO seeds later on? All right, so let's get a little bit into some of the more hands-on stuff of why we are here. So the first thing we need to know about seed saving is, like, what is a seed? And a seed is an actual living organism. Those little embryo babies are alive in there. And they're a product specifically of sexual reproduction between two plants. Now, some plants have, male and female flowers on the single plant. Some flowers have the male and female parts within one flower. Some have it on separate plants. There's a whole combination there's lots of different ways that plants make their flowers and place their flowers to maximize fertilization. And so then you have to think about also, like, what part of the plant is going to produce the seeds. So like carrots, for example, you don't find seeds inside the root. Once the greens on top go to flower, then they'll be pollinated, and that's where you'll find the seed on top. And there's all kinds of different types of seeds as well. Sometimes there's these two cotyledon. These are the first two leaves that emerge. Sometimes there's one. And certain seeds like corn have even more parts to it. But essentially, when you plant a seed, this little guy is going to be sensing its environment around it. And typically the radicle, which will turn into the root, will emerge first. And so it's sensing its environment and sensing the light. It's sensing the moisture. It's sensing the nutrients. And, it's going to use all those factors to determine if it should germinate or not, and if it's going to successfully grow into a mature plant. So why does it matter how we collect our seeds? Again, these little guys are, just waiting for the perfect, sometimes imperfect conditions, but for the right conditions to make sure that it's going to successfully grow. And when we mimic sort of like the natural process of how, imagine a tomato in the wild and the fruit will fall and it'll rot. Or is it going to be a seed that will mature and then get taken away by the wind? Or is it like a bean pod that's going to just sort of dry out on the vine until its shell cracks and the seeds drop? So the little things that you do, how you handle the seeds afterwards, can improve how long the seed will last, and it can improve how well it'll germinate. So like how fast it'll germinate, and how many will germinate out of the total amount of seeds that you have. This is a really great resource too. This is a really fun little video. These types of seed pods are, I think, a dehiscent, but like a drying seed pod. So think of like poppies that will, like, the top will dry and it'll crack, and see how sensitive this thing is to, and excited to spread its seeds. and they just sort of like explode. Some seeds like to pass through a gut. So like chili, for example, especially wild chilies were widely distributed through bird guts. And so that process of going through a gut will change the chemical sort of composition of the outside of the seed and improve its germination rate. Even shows ants carrying away chili seeds, and they will remove a certain part of that seed and use it like in their nests or something. But then the seeds have adapted to that, and they want that process to happen, and it improves their germination rates. This will touch on, the different processes for like flowers versus food. Pretty much all flowers, you're gonna want the flower to stay on and on the plant as long as possible. And this is going to be the case with food as well. But flowers, you'll want the seeds to fully develop on there and sort of die off. And like when they're easy to break off the top part, typically it's saying, okay, I'm ready now. But for things like zucchinis or cucumbers, you want that fruit to be as ripe as possible. Chilies, you want that color to change completely. So like a green bell pepper is likely not going to give you seeds that will germinate well. But if you have, the orange or the red bell peppers that have that darkest color as possible, then those seeds have had a lot of time in there to take what they can from the placenta and from the fruit itself, and fill up that sort of nutrient store that they have in there. So yeah, it turns out zucchinis, you want to let a couple of zucchinis just get like massive and big on that plant, because the zucchinis that we harvest and eat, those seeds are like nice and tender and edible. And same thing with the cucumber. You're gonna want it to get to the point where like it would be like a pumpkin seed in there. I mean, not that big, but like the texture, it's gonna be hard. It's not gonna be edible. So most fruits, you want them to be as ripe as possible. And yeah, so same thing with a tomato. You want them nice and red and squishy and juicy. The other thing you have to think about, so is it annual, biannual, perennial? That'll tell you when the seed will come. So like carrots and a lot of greens are biennial, which means the first year they're just going to grow into what you would eat, but you should leave them for the second year. And typically, I think your winters are a lot more harsh than in New Mexico, but like the little bit that comes back the next year, it typically bolts immediately, and then it'll get a bunch of little flowers on that top part, and it's not going to be edible anymore. These greens are going to be like bitter and gross, because it's putting now the work into creating that seed. An annual, so that's something that completes its life cycle within a year. Those you're going to get seeds every year. And so like a perennial is something that's that maintains its life for like several years. And typically these plants will still produce seeds every year as well, but the plant will still be alive. For something like an annual, once it completes its life cycle, then the whole plant is going to die. But that's not going to happen to a perennial. It's going to stick around. And I put this interesting note of if it's originally from a region that's tropical or temperate. So like chilies, for example, come from like Central and South America originally in very warm climates. And like a chili in that type of climate could grow for years. But you know, when we're growing it like here in New Mexico or where you guys are, you know, that's going to die off within a year. But that's just something interesting to think about that might tell you like when the plant is going to produce food. So a lot of annuals, something that'll complete its life cycle within 1 year, comes from somewhere where there's season changes. And so they typically die off in the winter, right? And then let's see here. So the two main methods that they have are wet or dry. So the dry method is just letting your fruit or flower sort of fully mature, get pollinated, and dry out on the vine. So chilies will do that. Lots of flowers will do that. And let me see the list here. Peas will do that. So different kinds of legumes will do that. And so that sometimes you can just like harvest the seeds by hand, but if you have something like we saw in the video earlier, they were like stomping on the amaranth. They do that because the seeds are so small and hard to separate. So they let them dry, fully mature and dry, but then what you can do is you can blow away the plant tissue and just the seeds will be left. So the wet method, I'm going to get to that more in the next slide, but another interesting practice that I've heard of, and this goes along with sort of like what seeds like to have done to them to increase their germination rates. So certain cultures would hold the seeds that they're going to plant, they would hold them in their mouth. And then as they're going along planting in the field, you know, just take it out of your mouth and then like stick it in the ground. And so our saliva, the acidity of our saliva would help break down that seed coat a little bit. So I thought that was really interesting. One of the middle school teachers showed me that. But just make sure your seeds don't have pests in them, because I looked later and I could see that weevils had eaten through the beans. And I was like, oh no, her and the students maybe got a little extra protein in that. So let's go to the next slide and let's talk about the wet method. So this is gonna be like all those juicy foods. So zucchinis, cucumbers, melons, tomatoes, you know, think about that natural process again, like something that watermelons, like in nature, if the fruit fell off and the seeds were still in it, like what would happen to it? And that's what it likes. And so you're going to want to squeeze out all the seeds, sort of get them all separated, swish them around real good in some water, and you're going to want to let those sit. So these are some cucumbers that they're doing this process with. And you see those cucumbers are like don't look edible anymore. You know, they're like huge. The skin is probably really thick on them. And so this is what you want to ferment it. And so that process of fermentation helps prepare the seed coat. And it really, I mean, you could plant the seeds without doing this, but this really does improve the germination rates. And I've even tried to like lessen the work of it, because it's like disgusting as well. I tried letting, you know, just the tomatoes rot themselves, get some good fermentation, and then just sort of like clean and dry my seeds from there. But I found that the seeds not every seed gets to like touch that fermentation process, so its seed coat doesn't get activated. So if you do it this way, you know, you can swish it around every couple days, or swish it around, I guess, every day, to make sure that every seed gets a chance to you know, rot a little bit. And very stinky, it's gross, but it's definitely worth it. And so after you get this done is when you would put it in a strainer, rinse it. I like to use like paper plates because it's easy to pick the seeds off of it afterwards. And you sort of want to like spread them out so they're not, you know, they're touching each other as little as possible because they'll really stick together in the drying process. Like I said, you don't have to do the fermentation and get the seeds moldy. Like they'll still grow, but typically these wet fruits, because of what would happen in nature, then you can do the wet method of allowing it to ferment. In this one, doing a tomato, and so they use like a brown paper bags, something like more durable. Paper towels, it'll just like stick to that. And some people don't mind if they do it on a paper towel because then they'll just plant the whole paper towel, and that's fine as well. But see here, that actually looks like they're using more like butcher paper. And yeah, on the paper plate, you know, it's done when the seeds no longer stick. And then I would even give it a couple more days after that to make sure that the seed itself is completely dry, because once you put those into storage, any moisture left will cause them to mold and go bad. And so I've done that exact same thing where I like label my paper plate with what it is. Make sure you label everything right away. And something that a note that I got from this that I didn't necessarily realize, but they sort of like fold it over so that there's like as little light as possible, because light will degrade the seeds a little bit. It's not like super bad, but yeah, I think that's still a good note to remember. And so yeah, you're going to want to do this with all of those wet, juicy fruits. So yeah, those are your two main methods. And then the drying, there's those couple of different techniques. Like I said before, you know, if it's like the amaranth with the super tiny seeds that would be like hard to grab one by one, then you can like use a fan to blow away all the plant material, and the seeds will stay. So this list, I heard some of the stuff that y'all are growing. So tomatoes, that's a wet fruit. You're gonna want to try and do that wet method. Peppers, you're going to want to leave those on the vine as long as possible, and even like dry out on the plant, and those seeds will get nice and plump. Beans, you know, they're gonna grow pretty big, and if within the pod. So I don't know if y'all have already seen some of your beans and peas. Like you can see the like the outline from the shell of like that seed growing inside of it. And these are you want them to dry out mostly on the vine, but then if you leave them too long, you're at risk of the pods cracking open and the seeds falling down. So you can pick those and then finish them drying like laid out somewhere. Cucumbers are going to be that wet method. Lettuce is, if it's hot, it's going to go to bolt right away, and it's going to produce those flowers on top, which you're going to want to mature completely before you cut off that top part of it. And I like to sort of like put those in a paper bag and break up the plant material so all the little seeds fall out, and then you can use like that fan method to blow away the plant tissue. Bok choy, I believe, is another green that will bolt the first year, but like these greens typically will they're biennial, so they'll like to produce their seeds the second year. Another really great test to see if your seeds are good for these food producing ones, let them soak in some water, and the seeds that float aren't going to be viable. That means that they don't have any of that endosperm, that sort of like nutrient store in them. And if they float to the top, then you can discard those. So especially like with the wet method, when you're doing your tomatoes and your cucumbers and your melons, you're going to see those seeds sink after a couple days, after they get a little bit of fermentation. And you know those are full, they're dense. That's why they're sinking to the bottom. And you're going to have some healthy seeds for that. And then pretty much all of these flowers, you're going to want the flower to pollinate the petals will die off and the seeds will continue to mature. And then after they're mature, you'll see the plant sort of starting to let that branch die on it. And once the base of the flower is sort of like starting to dry off, then those seeds are probably done and you can harvest those as well. But yeah, as long as you're letting those flower tops, fully pollinate and the petals die off and dry, then you're probably going to get good seeds. And so that's my last slide. I hope this has been informative. I think it is time for questions, and we can start going through the chat.
The first one, is there a different process for different types of seeds, food versus flower? I know you talked a little bit about that, but is there anything you might want to add to that?
Another thing to remember if you're harvesting like these dry seeds, in some flowers, like do what's comfortable for your hands as well. Like it can be kind of harsh sometimes, like sunflowers, for example. Doing that by hand can be really harsh on your hands, pulling them out, depending on the sunflower. Echinacea seeds, I feel like, are really hard and stuck in that I guess it's the placenta where the seeds were growing from. And so, yeah, just be careful. And like, sometimes you're going to have to like break it up in order to separate that seed from the part that, was feeding it and growing it. Sometimes it's really easy, like those lettuce seeds are going to be really easy to separate, but sometimes it's a little bit harder to do. And then, yeah, just thinking about that wet and dry method and think about how, if this seed were left to its own, how would it, disperse naturally? And so trying to mimic that, I think, is important.
Okay, from your experience, how many fruits or vegetables do you need to sacrifice to secure enough to guarantee a seed saving? What do you normally recommend?
I know somebody recommended like a few fruits, and it depends on like how much you're going to plant the next year. But like a few tomatoes is going to give you, I mean, I guess it depends on the size of the tomatoes too, but like a large tomato, that's easily going to give you like 30 to 50 seeds, and pick, as hard as it is, save your best crop for seed. And I mean, if you're a beginner too, just start with a couple, and get good at those. And, I've overwhelmed myself before where I just have like paper plates everywhere of like seeds, and it's, it became a little bit inefficient if you're not totally prepared for it. Yeah, I would say save like at least 3, but like 5 to 10 of your best crops. But then, you got to think about like sweet peas too. They have 5 or 6 seeds in one pod. So it depends on how much you want to plant the next year. And if you have excess, that's okay. They will last a few years, but don't harvest so much to where they're going to be sitting around for the next like 5 or 6 years. It's better just to get them in the ground and then harvest from a new crop.
Okay, the next question, is there a way to prep the nearby ground to enhance nature's natural path for the native flowers? For example, like the coneflower or the wild geraniums. This individual has been trying to help Jack the Pulpit particularly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, you want to be making sure you're checking your soil like every year and making sure that it's, full of nutrients, it's dark, it's nutritious. Sometimes, so like lettuce seeds or greens, they can reseed themselves very easily. So if you're noticing that the seeds are falling and you do want to like go throw some soil or some mulch or something on top of it, then that'll for sure help the next year the seeds come up again. And 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 they'll be fine out there over the winter as long as you're going to grow there again. And that kind of gets into the question of if seeds need to be winterized, and there are seeds that do like that. So I think it would be safe to assume that some perennials like that. So like a fruit tree, for example, is a perennial, and saving those seeds and putting them in the freezer for a few weeks improves germination. Same thing with lavender. So some herbs as well. But that's a great question. I have to do a little bit more research on that.
Okay, it looks like that covers all the questions in the chat.
All right. I hope everybody learned a little something. You all have a great fall and harvest season.